evening. Welcome to the 2023 C. Henry Smith Peace Oratorical Contest. Thanks to each and every one of you gathered this evening in the Humble Center and those joining on the live stream. You all, our supportive audience, are part of the long-standing tradition of speech-making here on campus. An intercollegiate peace association contest was first held here more than a century ago in 1907. So as Jason Samuel likes to remind the department, no pressure at all. Once again, thank you all for being here. A special welcome to President Stoltzfus. We are pleased to have the finisher from last year's contest with us, Greta Lapp-Clausen. Greta's a senior English and art major who went on to finish second in the binational contest, sponsored by Mennonite Central Committee in the US and Canada, for her speech, Humanizing Our World, One Walkway at a Time. We are also grateful to Greta and professors in the communication department for serving as judges in the preliminary round this year, and to Joshua Weaver, who served as a speech coach for the finalists. Joshua is a Goshen College graduate with a background in debate and a high school Bible, religion, and social studies teacher at Bethany Christian Schools. Let's next turn to our three judges for the contest tonight, and I'll invite each one of them to stand during their introduction. And please save applause until all three have been introduced. Dr. Gilberto Perez Jr. serves as the Vice President for Student Life and Dean of Students. Gilberto has worked at Goshen College for 10 years and has held positions in the social work department and as co-director of the Center for Intercultural and International Education. Prior to coming to Goshen College, he spent close to 18 years as a social worker doing school social work, partial hospitalization therapy, and community mental health. Gilberto is also the author of the Bienvenido Curriculum, a nationally recognized mental health promotion curriculum for Latinx immigrants. In the 1990s, Gilberto served as a peace evangelist in Puerto Rico through the Mennonite Church, and currently serves as MCC-US board chair. Originally from Robstown, Texas, he has lived in Goshen for over 20 years. Melinda Berry. Melinda is a passionate advocate of peace theology and nonviolence. She serves as Associate Professor of Theology and Ethics, as well as Director of the Faith Formation Collaborative at Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart. As well as being a graduate of AMBS and Union Theological Seminary in New York, Melinda is a 1996 graduate of Goshen College. She treasures memories of late nights in the record office and playing in the cello section of the orchestra pit right here in the Humble Center. Melinda is also completing her first term as a Goshen College board member. She and her spouse, John Stoltzfus, live in Goshen, and their two school-age children, a flock of chickens, a tank of fish, and Justice, a German shepherd. Our third judge, Elizabeth Miller. Elizabeth is a 2006 graduate of Goshen College and a native of Illinois. She has spent her adult life divided between Bogota, Colombia, and Goshen, Indiana. In both locations, she has participated actively in local Mennonite church life, Anabaptist historical and theological research and publishing, administration, herb gardening, and avid coffee consumption. She is an assistant professor in the history department here at GC and directs the Institute for the Study of Global Anabaptism and Mennonite Historical Library. Elizabeth, now a judge, was once a winner here on this stage. She placed first in the 2005 Peace Oratorical Contest for her speech titled Community Nutrition, Long-Term Solutions, Stability, and Sustainability. Please join me in thanking and recognizing our three judges for this evening. Now on to our 5 finalists. They passed through a preliminary competition last month. They have each worked so hard shaping and polishing their speeches for this evening. And to give you a sense of their extensive preparation, I'll describe a few of the steps. They received direct feedback from the judges in the preliminary round. Then they received written feedback on their manuscripts from the communication department. They met with at least one faculty member for support. They watched videos of previous winning speeches. They worked individually with the speech coach Joshua Weaver. And they went through a final private practice session on the stage just this afternoon. They have invested deeply in their speeches, as you will see in just a few moments. A quick note, the order of speakers for tonight was determined by a drawing. I invited our finalists to prepare a short bio to be shared with you for their introduction. And speakers, please stand one at a time as I introduce you, and we'll hold the applause until all have been introduced. Our first speaker is Jakyra Green, a junior English and secondary education major from Elkhart. Jakyra is currently the president of the Black Student Union and executive co-editor for The Record. She has been a member of Broadside and Teach Elkhart County and also served as an MLK committee member this year. Our next speaker, Michael Keith Murrell, a junior broadcasting major from Kettering, Ohio. Mike serves as the music director for 91.1 The Globe. Mike is a retired Army intelligence officer. He has two children, Emily, age 15, and Nathan, age 13. Mike has a bachelor's degree in history from Excelsior College in Albany, New York, and a master's degree in applied military arts and sciences from the U.S. Air Force's War College. Our third speaker is Augusta Nafziger, a senior writing and music major from Weyers Cave, Virginia. Augusta served as executive editor of The Record in the fall and is currently one of the English department's Horswell Fellows. Augusta's work has been published in Anabaptist World, Meta's The Marketplace, and the Elkhart Truth. And she was the winner of the 2021 statewide journalism Keating contest. She's also involved in Voices of the Earth, Chamber Choir, the musical, and Prevention Intervention Network. Fourth is Caleb Shenk, a junior majoring in accounting with minors in Bible religion and Spanish. Caleb has worked with The Record every semester being in college, including serving as digital editor this semester. He is a board member for the MCC Great Lakes, sings in Vox Profundi, plays on the men's tennis team, and is a TA and tutor for the business department. Daniel Eash-Scott is our final speaker for this evening. Daniel is a junior history major and journalism minor from Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. Daniel is the features editor for The Record this semester and writes a weekly column for the Goshen News. He worked as a Maple Scholar last summer, serves on the Mennonite Amish Museum Committee at Goshen College, and sings with Vox Profundi. Daniel also holds GC's Fan of the Year Award for acting like a fool in a cheap squirrel suit. Please join me in welcoming our 5 finalists to the competition. Now, we listen to the 5 speeches. I invite you to tuck your devices away as our speakers share with us, beginning with Jakyra and then following the order listed in the program. Thank you.
From early childhood, many of us are taught a simplistic definition of peace. We are taught to love our neighbor and cultivate empathy. Most of all, we are taught to abide by the saying, treat others as you wish to be treated. Almost as if that phrase applies universally to all, transcending borders and identities. Almost as if peace is solely based on how we perceive the world. With that said, is the concept of peace an illusion for some, but real for others? Let me share some of my own experiences where peace did not exist. In second grade, my black friend told me about a time she overheard another classmate ask the white teacher, "What do you do if a police officer is mean to you?" My friend remembers the teacher's face etched in confusion. As these conversations happen, my hands begin to sweat and my legs bounce up and down. In these moments, during conversations with friends, I am not at peace. And in high school, I went to a convenience store with my friends. My white friend paid for my sour Skittles, and I walked out. The cashier thought I was stealing and almost pressed the button to alert the cops. I was furious, and my friend said to chill out because it wasn't a big deal. We almost argued the whole car ride back until I realized my words had just cascaded onto tone-deaf ears. When I have to defend myself against racism, I am not at peace. These stories do not begin to encompass the lived realities of people of color. Speaking from my experience living in a Black identity, many people have attempted to deflect the damage and injustice to the Black community by saying all lives matter, bringing up Black-on-Black crime, claiming they don't see color or that Black people are just paranoid about being mistreated by the police. And yet, the truth is far from an illusion and much more complex. In May of 2022, a normal day of grocery shopping in Buffalo, New York, was transformed into a scene of mass murder. 13 victims were shot in a racially motivated attack that killed 10, all Black. All of these victims were hunted for the color of their skin. These people were like you and me, running errands or an employee finishing a work shift when their paths crossed with a white man driven by hate. And the names of the fallen murdered in 2022 and 2023 by officers are too many to list. And yet, here are a few who left too soon. Donnell Rochester, 18, Baltimore, Maryland. Dante Cantrell, 58, South Bend, Indiana. And Tyree Nichols, 29, Memphis, Tennessee. Tragically, violence towards Black women receives little to no media coverage. According to Insider, the police shot and killed at least 50 Black women from February 2015 to February 2021. There are cases like Breonna Taylor, whose death sparked national news coverage, but this was an exception out of many untold stories. Rekia Boyd, for example, was a 22-year-old unarmed Black woman, and no one showed up to march at her rally, even though the police went free. And while this violence against Black people continues, illusion runs rampant in how society, particularly white people, view racial or societal peace in the experiences of Black people. Even with our country's racist history, many white Americans fail to see the racial discrepancies and inequities directly linked to systemic racism. There has been improvement in recent decades, but significant gaps rooted in slavery, Jim Crow, and racism remain prevalent. In 2020, Reuters released a report, The Black and White Race Gap. The numbers show us these truths. 1, disparities for Black women begin at birth. They are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. As for Black infants, they die twice the rate as white infants. 2, Black undergraduate students owe approximately $7,000 more in student loans than their white counterparts. Friends have come to me stressed over how they'll pay their tuition. Goshen College's advice? Take out more loans. This advice doesn't reflect the realities Black students face. It only conveys the illusion that we are all on equal footing. 3, Black men receive prison sentences at least 20% or longer than white men for the exact crime. This racial-based prosecution is likely to produce wrongful convictions and disproportionate incarceration of people of color. How How is this justice? How is this peace? Issues meant to be resolved years ago affect the lives of contemporary Black society and individuals. Systemic problems like those above involving death, debt, and prison must be addressed to achieve realistic and sustainable peace. Many white people who are not impacted by systemic racism assume peace is universal, but this is an illusion. Wanting racism fixed by ignoring race or being kind to everyone. Ignoring racism carries a fantasy or utopian element that is beyond reality. According to a poll by David Binder Research, 50% of young white Americans say today discrimination against them is as big of a problem as discrimination against minorities. And while most of them said they feel uncomfortable discussing racial issues, I feel uncomfortable being racially profiled. Racism, systemic racism, is another thing we have to talk about, even if you are not directly affected by it. The truth is, we cannot be the beneficiaries of an oppressive society without facing the repercussions. It is why civil unrest followed after George Floyd's death. There was an outpour of multiracial support as more people acknowledged the realities of systemic racism. As I came across videos of his murder, I said to myself, this hurts, but I'm not shocked. To be shocked is a privilege Black people do not have. We are always waiting for the next Floyd, praying that tomorrow it won't be us. And now I ask, those of you white, why did it take a man dying with a police officer kneeling on his neck for you to think that this should not be happening? Why is the only time you notice Black people when there is a major headline? With that said, the absence of violence doesn't always mean peace. Violence happens not only on our streets, but in our hospital rooms and grocery stores. It occurs when you remain silent during acts of injustice simply because you are not witnessing Black bodies being abused. So again, how is this peace or justice if none of my people are safe? Many of us are taught that we are all the same and that our skin color is irrelevant. That if we comply, peace works for us all the same. If that were true, George Floyd would still be alive, his family would not mourn his death. If that were true, if we were really all the same, I wouldn't have the lingering worry that someday my siblings or I could be the next Ma'Khia Bryant. But that is the privilege of peace that Black people are not afforded. Being anti-racist is continuous work. Incorporating peace into your everyday goes beyond the simple definition we have all been accustomed to learning. Although engaging with social media and attending protests are essential, it does not stop there. It is everyday actions like who you surround yourself with and how you act when no one is watching. How do you show up for Black people in smaller ways? Listen. When Black people tell you about their lived experience, understand they chose to do that. Understand how hard it is for them to share about a target that is always on their back, something many white people will never encounter. And lastly, stop equating silence with peace or lack of violence. Speak up in all areas of racial injustice. This is just a start to incorporating peace and diversity into your life. I don't believe in giving people a manual to do better, so go do better, because these truths have always been there. The future shouldn't be shrouded in this utopian illusion, this simplistic definition of peace bred from white silence and ignorance. Peace is complex. Peace is hard. But an endurable peace, created from the lens of social justice, will always matter. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mike Murrell. I am a veteran, a United States Army veteran, to be exact. But I'm also a pacifist. What? How can that be? Well, I'm going to spend the next several minutes telling you my journey. This is an oratorical contest that deals with peace, and what better person to talk about peace than someone who has experienced war? Yes, I retired from the Army in June of 2022 after serving the better part of 20 years. I've seen all the good and the bad that comes from a career in the military. I retired a major, an officer, but I didn't start there. My Army career started shortly after 9/11, but it didn't start because of 9/11. In the months before the September 11th attacks, I flunked out of college. I had accrued an enormous amount of student loan debt. One day I was driving to my minimum wage job, and I saw a banner outside an Army recruiting station. It said they would pay off my school loans if I joined. I mean, it was a time of war. They were looking for anybody and everybody that they could get. While others joined out of a sense of patriotism, love of country, or some strong sense of duty, my decision to join was purely financial. But it turns out I'm not alone. A 2018 study by the Department of the Army determined that 42% of Army enlistees join for financial reasons. Was I a pacifist back then? I've battled that question in my head. I don't think I was. I wasn't necessarily for the war, but I wasn't against it. The Army was a means for me to pay off my debt. Well, after my first deployment to Afghanistan in 2006, I realized I wanted to make a career out of the Army. On that deployment, I saw relatively little action as I spent almost all of my time on a forward operating base, meaning I was behind four walls with armed guards nearly all the time. For the most part, I felt safe. The Army still had its charm. After that deployment, I went to officer candidate school. Being an officer opened a door to a much darker side of the Army. I mean, when you are enlisted, you get to stay in your own little bubble. But as an officer, I had senior sergeants who were suffering severe post-traumatic stress disorder. As their commander, I would have to intervene when they were involved in DUIs or domestic problems at home, or even on one occasion when they took their own life. I was a company commander, and during that time, I had a soldier in my unit. He was about to retire. He went into his backyard with a shotgun and blew the back of his own head off. As his commander, it fell upon me to identify his remains. The war was too much for him, and it followed him home. In 2010, I deployed to Afghanistan again. This deployment changed everything for me. This one was way different than my first deployment. I found myself living alongside my Afghan counterparts. We were training them to take back over their country. As an intelligence officer, I knew that at least half of these Afghans I was living with were either members of the Taliban or Taliban sympathizers. I spent a significant amount of time on this deployment, what we call outside the wire, meaning I did not have walls and armed guards around me. I was not on a base. I was at the mercy of my knowledge of my weapon and my brothers and sisters to my right and left. I became a witness and even an agent of death. I became something I never imagined possible. It is hard to explain what it feels like to know that you're going to die. Sometime around July of 2010, I accepted that I would not live to see 2011. And I was okay with it. I mean, how crazy is that? I fully expected to die, but I didn't. Somehow, by the grace of God, I survived. My 2010-2011 deployment made me the pacifist that I am today. I don't know how anyone could go through what I went through or see what I've seen and not be a pacifist. I cannot comprehend it at all. It baffles me how anyone could experience the slightest bit what I've experienced and still crave bloodshed. It's been 12 years since that deployment. Why would I stay in the Army after that? Well, I'll be the first to tell you that the horror followed me home. I am not the same person I was 20 years ago. I am a shell of that man, a 20th generation photocopy. I don't think he and I would get along today at all. But part of that change comes from something that happens to every service member at some level. Institutionalization. We become institutionalized. The Army becomes a part of who and what we are. There's comfort in that. The Army took care of me. The Army took care of my family. It was steady income. The Army helped me get my first bachelor's degree and even saw fit to get my master's degree too. But that wasn't the only reason I stayed in. It took time for me to fully comprehend how much I hated being in the Army. And when I finally came to terms with it, I had 14 years of service in. I was 6 years away from being able to retire. I could tough out 6 years, right? Well, I did, but at a cost. Those last 6 years of my career were the worst 6 years of my life. I discovered I have a drinking problem. I lost my family. I got a divorce. I find myself isolated from my children even today. I trudged through those last 6 years to the golden gates of retirement. Let me tell you something about those golden gates. They feel plastic, almost fake, fragile. Suddenly, I was no longer a soldier. Suddenly, I was no longer an officer. I am suddenly just a man lost in this world of uncertainty. There are two things I beg of you right now. One, please do not judge me for what I've done. And two, please don't feel sorry for me. I am discovering my peace, and my peace comes through faith. My faith in God and my faith in humanity. The Bible speaks about peace. My favorite verse for this is in Isaiah 11. It says, "The wolf will live with the lamb." Let me tell you, I have been the wolf, and I have been the lamb. And when I was the wolf, I preyed on the lambs. And when I was the lamb, the wolves surrounded me. And the wolves still hunt me in my dreams, even today. When I came to Goshen College, I could tell that people walked on eggshells around me. I mean, it's a pacifist school, and I'm a war veteran. People didn't know what to think. Well, let me tell you something. There were some who were so bold as to ask me about my service, to ask me how I felt I fit in with this pacifist institution. And once they did that, those eggshells disappeared. They discovered that I'm not that different from them. I like cheeseburgers. I love Marvel movies. I enjoy walks on the beach. And yes, I get nervous when I talk in front of people. I was recently asked what needs to happen for there to be peace on earth. I wish I knew. I really do. But I can tell you one thing you can do. Communicate. There are other veterans like me. I guarantee it. I am not the only pacifist warrior. Ask us about our service. Ask us what we think about peace. And ask us if we're okay, because many of us are not. Will they all be like me? No, but there will be some. But if we cannot communicate with those who have seen war, can we ever truly know peace? For the sake of you, my children, and the generations yet to come? I hope so. Thank you.
In November of 2021, I participated in a statewide journalism contest. I had 5 hours to write a story from the prompt Indianapolis in Flux, which, as you can probably imagine, did not give me very much to work with. It was my first time in Indianapolis, and I got lost very quickly and more than once. It was also 25 degrees, and the only coat I brought with me was a very thin, flimsy trench coat because I wanted to look really professional and reporter-like. And I was nervous to stop strangers on the street and ask them for interviews when I didn't have an idea for my story. But after an hour of aimlessly walking around the city, looking for inspiration, I finally got up the nerve to begin interviewing. I talked to a musician in a jazz bar who was worried that live music would never be the same after COVID-19. I begged the security guard at the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra office for an interview with an administrator and was given 5 minutes to ask her my rapid-fire questions. I talked to 4 students from a high school marching band. You would have thought that they were being featured on national TV from how thrilled they were about our brief interview in the Circle Center Mall, of all places. If this contest taught me anything, it's that people need to talk. They need to talk about themselves and their lives and the things that they're passionate about. They need to name what they think needs to be changed in the world in order for it to be changed. And one of the only ways in which that is accomplished is through local reporting. Staff from local papers who cover news and human interest stories on the ground, who go out into their communities and ask people these important questions. But many of these important questions are not being asked. Many of these voices in local communities are not being heard. We are in the midst of a growing news crisis. We have lost a quarter of all US newspapers since 2005. More than 2,500 papers shut down, according to a 2022 study by Northwestern University. If this trend continues, we'll have lost a third of our nation's papers by 2025. To a lot of people, this might not seem like a big deal. In fact, some people might say that we as a society are more informed and up to date with local and world events than ever, because we have phones now, right? It's so easy to use our devices to access an endless stream of news from national publications and entertainment magazines and more, all curated to your taste. With all of the technology and access to information that surrounds us on a daily basis, the idea that news sources might be dying out in our country feels almost laughable. But it's become clear in the last 2 decades that when we don't have a local news source to turn to, we lose the very essence of our democracy. We lose our sense of involvement and community, our interest in ongoing local events. Our civic engagement suffers. A study by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation found that those who read newspapers are 25% more likely to vote than people who rely on word-of-mouth news. The power of a well-informed public should not be underestimated, and nor should the danger of a public that is in the dark. And when we're only receiving news from large national publications, we're becoming removed from our communities. It creates a sense of detachment from local issues and a not-my-problem mindset. We are literally no longer on the same page. We are lacking the shared, uniting experience of reading a common local paper. Instead, we read about events in faraway places and share the links on social media, commenting, "How horrible," or "When will things change?" But in the meantime, it is becoming increasingly difficult for us to connect with issues in our own communities. How can we when no one is writing about them? The term news desert has become more commonplace since 2005. It is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, an area that is, in effect, totally void of access to news. Not surprisingly, the papers that are most likely to be shut down or scaled back are those in rural areas, particularly low-income areas. Northwestern University research shows that the average median annual income of a home in a news desert is $15,000 less than the average US household. And according to the Washington Post, more than 200 counties in the United States are news deserts, while more than 1,500 have just one active paper. And many of these remaining papers are ghost papers that have lost both staff and funding. Don't take it from me, take it from Sheila Selman, the current editor of the Goshen News. When Sheila began working at the Goshen News 30 years ago, the paper had a staff of 17 in the newsroom. She says that there was a general sense of being on top of just about everything. Today, this same paper has 2 reporters, a night editor, a sports editor, and a photographer, for a total of 6 staff, including Sheila. The paper had to cut its social media position last year, so video production, podcasts, updating the web and social media and analytics are now all on the shoulders of Sheila, in addition to her editor responsibilities. She informed me that the staff is down to covering the bare minimum. The decline of local news is happening in our community here in Goshen. And it's happening pretty much everywhere else, too. In her book, Ghosting the News, Local Journalism and the Crisis of American Democracy, Margaret Sullivan writes that American newspapers cut 45% of their newsroom staff between 2008 and 2017. Newspapers once generated most of their revenue from advertising, but with the rise of social media and digital ads, papers are increasingly being bought up by large media corporations. These companies often make cuts to staff and circulation, and they also remove the title of local from our news sources. Paxton Media Group owns the Elkhart Truth. Paxton Media Group is also very much not in Elkhart or even Indiana. It's a company in Kentucky that owns more than 50 newspapers around the United States. The South Bend Tribune is owned by a company in Virginia. There's no uniformity to this system, no clear relation between the papers that each media group acquires. It's all about money. These corporations don't care about your local community in the way that the newspapers they own do. And because many of our remaining papers are being bought up by media companies, many stories are not being told. A local newspaper should not be a megaphone for Paxton Media Group or any other corporation. It should be a mouthpiece for those voices in our communities that so often go unheard. A strong local paper can cover issues and injustices that cause inequalities within communities. And losing access to this kind of news source is not just a social justice issue. It is an issue of human dignity. Being an informed citizen, and more specifically, an informed voter, should never be a privilege. But as local news continues its downward spiral, it has become one. Apart from the myriad of ways in which the news crisis is impacting communities, it's also just terribly sad. Local newspapers have run groundbreaking, community-shifting stories that might never be reported on by larger publications. Some of them go on to become national news. Take, for instance, the Indianapolis Star's coverage of USA Gymnastics physician Larry Nassar's criminal abuse and sexual conduct. And there are other stories, too, that might seem small and insignificant, not Pulitzer-winning articles, but stories about the musical that your neighbor's kid is in, or nonprofit fundraisers that someone at your church is organizing, or obituaries for people who, were they not written about in a local paper, might not have anyone to remember them. It's the local advice columns and the always slightly dubious recipes. It's these little things, too, that we are losing. The loss of these local reporters and news sources will continue to fray the very fabric of our democracy if we do not search for solutions. Lack of awareness and civic engagement is just the beginning. Instances of misinformation and polarization are multiplying within our country as well. The first step that you should take, if you are financially able, is to subscribe to your local newspaper. According to Sheila Selman, many journalists, including our local reporters at the Goshen News, are paid less than $35,000 a year. Many people refuse to pay for a subscription to a paper, claiming that access to news should be free, which would be great, but news that is reported on and compiled into an easy-to-read format cannot always be free within our current system, because our journalists must be paid. You can also donate to local news nonprofits in your area. Recently, there's actually been a very exciting addition to Indiana's fight against declining journalism, and that is the Indiana Local News Initiative. The Indianapolis Star reported earlier this week that the new initiative will be working this year to provide Hoosiers with daily, nonpartisan, and free journalism that centers community voices. The initiative is proof that change is possible. Local journalism is not going down without a fight. There are even hopes that one day a bill will provide Americans with a refundable tax credit that can be used to subscribe or donate to a local news organization. If you don't have the means to pay for a subscription or a donation, you can write to your representatives or simply try your best to stay informed in this age of misinformation. And there's more that can be done. There are so many steps to be taken in the direction of reclaiming the trust between local communities and their news sources. There's still time for us to revive journalism and to give voice to those who are not being heard. Let's not waste it. Thank you.
I started my internship with a public accounting firm at the beginning of January, and so began my career of what my fellow accounting students and I have affectionately called crunching and hunching. It's much more exciting than that, though, trust me. My internship basically consists of helping businesses decide what parts of their income they have to pay taxes on. And they generally appreciate our services, especially when we find ways to lower their taxes, whether through credits or deductions or by delaying the tax into future years. Accountants don't often criticize the idea of taxation. However, I found it hard to reconcile parts of the tax system with my personal faith. Personally, if I were drafted to serve in war, I would be compelled to ask for alternative service, since it goes against my beliefs. Jesus said to love your enemies, and for me, that means I can't serve in the military. And in a draft, the US would probably allow me to refuse participating in the military. The Supreme Court has repeatedly allowed citizens to object from physical participation in war due to deeply held religious or moral beliefs. What puzzles and frustrates me, however, is how this right ends at physical participation in war. I can be granted an alternative to physical killing, yet have no choice in paying taxes that fund the killing. For context, according to the War Resisters League, 37% of each dollar we're taxed on goes to the military. So why should I be forced to pay others to take up arms? The issues at stake are fundamentally the same, whether it's with being drafted or taxed. I want an alternative to contribute nonviolently. As the National Campaign for Peace Tax Fund says, paying for war is morally equivalent to participating in war. Back to my internship. About a month ago, I had to fill out a form applying for special status from the IRS to let me prepare tax returns for people other than myself. And in doing this, I came upon a question that made me pause. I had to check a box acknowledging that I was compliant with federal tax laws and would pay all taxes timely. Now, this question was meant to be quickly acknowledged and confirmed. There's certainly not many accountants who are willfully evading their taxes or had to ponder this. This issue of paying taxes to the military can be complex for anyone, but as an accountant, it was especially difficult for a couple of reasons. For one, I had to check that box under oath. So if I were to withhold my taxes, a mere tax evasion crime could become tax evasion plus perjury. Whew, scary, right? But on top of that, the issue of war taxes as an accountant is perhaps more internal. I'm helping the government collect revenue from 9 to 5, but on the side, I'm challenging what those taxes are spent on. It's hard to speak out of both sides of my mouth. If I really have a problem with taxation that funds the military, why am I working as an accountant? Now, taxation itself is not the problem. Taxes fund many social services that we benefit from, and I'm all for raising them, but the way that our country prioritizes military spending can't be separated from taxation. The question we face then is what to do about that 37% of our taxes if we're compelled to resist violence. I've wrestled with this issue in various forms throughout college. Last semester, I wrote a research paper for a Bible class on how Jesus answered the question of paying taxes to Caesar. And after choosing this topic, I realized I had actually chosen the same passage for an economics essay 2 years earlier. And in a journalism class, I wrote an op-ed a year ago on this same issue of what to do about taxes that go to the military. I sent it to my representative. She said that she'd keep my thoughts in mind. And perhaps most obviously, I felt conflicted as someone with an accounting major and Bible religion minor. This question of what to do about my taxes had plagued me for long enough, and I wanted to use this speech to see if I could wrap a bow on it and figure out where I finally stood. When I wrote my op-ed 1 year ago, I was not conflicted. I said that, quote, I plan on not paying the 37% of my taxes that go to the military, and I cannot in good faith pay these taxes that support it, and I'm ready to accept the consequences that may come, end quote. I knew that this was illegal, but I was fine with that. I saw civil disobedience as the best and perhaps only way to protest an unjust system in hopes of changing it. One other legal alternative that I acknowledged, and perhaps you've thought of, is the option to lower your income below the taxable line so that you don't pay any taxes, and then none to the military, whether through refusing pay raises or taking tax deductions. Ideally, though, the government would set up a legal way for peace-seeking people to redirect their taxes to nonviolent means, such as healthcare or charity. That 37% could pay for insulin or local public transit instead of guns and tanks. In fact, there's a bill in Congress to establish that fund, H.R. 4529, the Religious Freedom Peace Tax Fund Act. But it's been sitting there in some form since the 1960s, and it's no closer to passing. I realized soon after writing the op-ed, however, that if it's difficult to illegally withhold taxes from the government, then it's especially difficult to do it as an accountant. When I checked that box 1 month ago saying that I have completely paid my taxes, I had a pit in my stomach as I knew that my gutsy sophomore self would have been a bit saddened to see me not take a stance. But what would taking a stance look like? Is it best to break the law and lose my ability to be an accountant? I've talked to some Mennonites who believe that until we start going to jail for tax evasion, we won't see any changes. That seems pretty scary. In the accounting field, we deal with the hows and how much of taxation. The question of whether to pay taxes is a bit like asking whether basketball players should practice free throws. The morality of taxation to accountants is unquestioned. And for good reason. Of course, accountants need to advocate for taxation. Our entire profession, from our rules to our paychecks, is built on the assumption that people and businesses pay their fair share of taxes. If accounting looks at laws for morality, Jesus finds another path. When asked whether to pay taxes, Jesus gave the famous response, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." Well, if only it were that simple. What does that mean today? In my research, I found that the best scholars think that Jesus wasn't clear. He didn't really take the position to reject taxes, and he didn't take the position that you must pay taxes. Somewhere in between is the way of Jesus. In the end, I think that neither my accounting major nor my Bible religion minor has all the answers for my taxes. My op-ed that thought it had all the answers probably doesn't either. It's better to give others grace about how they choose to pay their taxes, and that grace should extend to myself as well. The tax fund bill, for example, isn't a silver bullet. The proposed bill decades ago used to allow taxpayers to contribute the military portion towards charity or peace initiatives, but the proposed bill now would just pool all the money to not be used for the military, and everyone else's military contributions would effectively increase, not actually reducing any military funding. At least in the short term, military spending isn't likely to change, and so the larger question that remains for me is the best way to work for peace. Is it by conforming to the laws for a personal peace, like paying no taxes? Or is it by uncompromisingly protesting injustices and withholding your taxes? Does sitting in jail promote change? I've struggled to discern when to work for a middle ground solution, and when to be uncompromising, and when to check a box. So for my final answer, this year, I plan on taking advantage of tax deductions, such as retirement accounts and health savings plans, to keep my income below the line for taxation. I might not be able to get it completely to zero, but I'll keep working at it and finding my way forward year by year. In 2023, defense spending is budgeted to be $756 billion. With half of that budget, nonprofit organizations estimate that the US could end world hunger and world homelessness. Just half of 1 year of one country's spending on the military. I have a fundamental disagreement with the way that our country prioritizes defense spending. My hope is to be able to, in some small way, participate in rerouting money from guns to food, from killing to life, and from violence to a vision bold enough to hope and work for peace. Thank you.
Power and peace have always felt like polar opposites to me, but they're not. Power can feel like a bad word, I think, when paired with strong leadership, especially strong and misguided leadership. Part of that suspicion of power comes from growing up Mennonite, where I've often been told to release and kind of refuse power, push it away. Part of it stems from a worry about toxic masculinity. This worry about locker room talk that we hear all over the internet isn't new. I've heard this kind of talk my whole life, growing up, playing sports, in the classroom, etc. That steered me away from the idea of being authoritative and assertive, because I felt like that doesn't work towards peace, and it doesn't build relationships. But I found out that that's not always necessarily true, and I've learned that in a really interesting place, the baseball diamond. Many of you know that I go to a lot of Goshen home games. Some of you have probably seen me in the old squirrel suit, so there's a good chance that a fair number of you all have seen me calmly, peacefully, quietly giving the referees some tips on how to do their jobs. So maybe it's surprising, but I've worked as a baseball umpire for 8 years now. Last summer, I worked about 70 games in the Goshen area and all around, ranging from Little League to high school to college summer league baseball. What's interesting for me about being an umpire is that I have total authority over what happens on the field. Myself, along with maybe one partner, we have control over the entire game. That's a weird feeling for me. Like I said, I'm not someone who typically leads by exercising power. Group projects, discussions, work decisions, I like to kind of ask around and get a consensus and have everybody come to an agreement. I'm very easily influenced by people around me, as my friends will tell you, because I know that I could always be wrong. But I can't build consensus on the ball field. You can't exactly ask a catcher and a batter to agree on a called third strike. When I've got that blue shirt and hat on, I can't be wrong, right? If I don't at least act confident in my decisions, I know I'll get eaten alive by parents, coaches, players alike, all trying to get under my skin and influence my calls. Meanwhile, when I'm out there, my job is to do everything as well as I can and make the right call without any outside influence. So when I step on the ball field, I have to kind of enter a different state of mind. What I've found is that in that state of mind, having compassion and empathy is still really important. In the past year, I've been called blind, I've been called an idiot, and I've been called a lot of things that I really shouldn't say up here. So when a manager is out of the dugout, yelling at me, getting in my face, it's really easy to just kind of ignore everything they say, let them go on and on and on until it gets to the point where I just say, all right, that's enough. And I say, boom, and I kick them out of there. But I like trying to hear them out. There's a reason they're frustrated, and there's a very real chance that I could be in the wrong. At the end of the day, I'm only human. I've reversed my fair share of calls after talking with my partner, and it's a little bit embarrassing, but I like to make a point to apologizing to the coach after the game when this happens. I started this after one of my first games last summer, when I called a phantom balk on a pitcher. For any of you that know baseball out there, you know the balk rule is really dumb, it's convoluted, it's stupid, and it shouldn't exist. But it was the wrong call. After the game, I went to the pitcher and I said, hey, I made the wrong call, I'm sorry about that. I told the pitcher he had a really good pickoff move, he was spinning around to throw to second base, and that he was in the right, and in the future he should keep doing that. He was a middle schooler. I wanted him to get better at the game. Many umpires I've talked to really don't like the idea of apologizing. They think it makes you appear weak. I disagree. I think apologizing when you've made a mistake is important in any relationships. In the workplace, if you mess up and it affects somebody else, an apology goes a surprisingly long way. I also like to make a point of making myself seem human to the players. I really like working high school games because the catcher and I will often get into little discussions behind the plate. I've had discussions with catchers that we mutter back and forth where I say, oh yeah, I don't know, might have squeezed you on that call, next time I'll give it to you. That can build a relationship. It builds a bond between myself and the catcher, and there's real trust there. This idea of compassion, I think, extends to any leadership situation. Strong leadership is a valuable tool when it's used judiciously. Even just small situations. I live in a house with 9 other people, and the ability to be a powerful voice of reason can provide clarity and strength for everybody to kind of work off of. I think leading through peace means being a confident, assertive leader while simultaneously having compassion and humility. As odd as it sounds, I've gained an appreciation for power. I'm not trying to play to the power-hungry, umpire, stereotype, whatever. But in this world, some people will have power in certain situations. I think it's important to try to use that power for good and understand your fallibility as a leader. I work on that every day. Like many of you in this room, maybe most of you, I live with implicit power daily. I'm a straight, cisgender, upper middle class, white, college-educated Christian man. I'm privileged in so many ways. I think this plays into how uncomfortable I am with power too. But it's been really important in my mind to not just immediately reject that. Unless our society changes drastically soon, this power is going to stick with me. I can't just get rid of it. And so accepting that power and acknowledging it is the first step in my mind. And then releasing it when possible and giving it to other people is important. But if you can't release it, lift other people up. Share that power. That's key. You'll mess up any time you're in power. There's a fine line between peace and power, and it can be really easy to lose track of that. But if your intent is genuine, you'll either do well or people will be more willing to let you know when you make a mistake. You just have to keep an open ear. Anyways, back to baseball. The difference a peace-centered approach to power can make, I think, is bigger than we realize. I'm an umpire, and I'm an avid fan of sports, teams across all kinds of different sports and leagues. There's a culture of abuse towards officials in any sport. Everybody hates the ref. I like to think that this way of umpiring and handling power is one way to kind of shift that narrative. If kids have dialogue with me and we have a bit of a mutual appreciation, maybe they'll think of officials in a better light. I'll still voice my feelings to the refs at Goshen home games, but I also make a point of thanking them after the game's over. I got chewed out by some mom in a soccer game last year because I told her to stop harassing the refs after the match was over and everybody was leaving the field. I think this way of looking at power is helpful in relationship building. I know some coaches and players really well now, thanks to my time as an umpire. But it extends past the ball field. Being a leader is kind of risky when it comes to relationships. It's really tough when you have to tell people what to do. But when you embrace your fallibility in the workspace, people notice, whether that workspace is the baseball field or corporate America. It's really easy to see others' power but be blind to your own. So especially in the workplace, if you can be aware of your power and lead empathetically and responsibly, it makes a difference. There's a recent study that just came out from Harvard Business Review that found that although compassionate leadership is important in the workplace and it's key to improving outcomes, compassion isn't everything. You have to have wisdom too. And that's what this comes to. Wisdom means having self-awareness and humility, while compassion is that empathy and understanding. And when you combine the two, there's your leadership centered on peace. And that peace has led to a number of memorable moments for me. But the best one just sticks out in my mind. It was the third day of this travel baseball tournament down south in Indiana, about an hour out of here. There were 11 and 12-year-old baseball players that had been competing the whole time. I had worked every single game of the tournament, so I knew the players really well, I knew the coaches really well, they all knew me. It's the last inning, last game. The pitch comes in, swing and a miss, batter's out, ball game's over. The catcher is this 12-year-old scrappy kid from Bremen, Indiana. He had just made it to the semi-state tournament. His whole team is rushing the mound, going crazy, celebrating, and the first thing he does is he turns around and says, "Hey, Blue, can I give you a hug?" And of course, immediately I thought, me? The boogeyman in blue? The guy that your dad has been screaming at this whole weekend? And I hadn't done him any favors in this game, trust me. But, of course I said yes. I knelt down to give him a hug. And it was one of those hugs that you just know meant something. He squeezed the air out of me right through my chest protector. In that moment, it kind of clicked. I don't have to be the boogeyman just because I have this power. All this talk about empathy, fallibility, wisdom, bottom line, it means I can use this peace mindset to bring a sense of community to the baseball field. And in an environment that's so competitive and dog-eat-dog and win at all costs, community is a beautiful thing. Thank you.
How about another big round of applause for all the finalists? I will now dismiss our 3 judges to do the work that they are here to do. And during their deliberations, I invite you all to stay around, visit with one another. Please enjoy the reception in the Yost room. Although keep all food and drinks out in the lobby, as no food and drink is allowed here in the Humble Center. Whether you're joining us here or you're joining us remotely, I invite you to stay until the judges return and we will announce the winners. Thank you again. Thank you to all of you this evening who stayed around for the announcement. We want to thank the judges for their fine work, and we are now ready to announce the top 2 winners of the 2023 C. Henry Smith Peace Oratorical Contest. Please come to the platform as your name is announced. The second place winner and recipient of a $150 award is Caleb Shenk. First place winner and recipient of a $300 award and the opportunity to represent Goshen College in the binational competition is Jakyra Green. While we're standing, one more round of applause for all the finalists. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening and see you back here next year.